So in general, the discussion should begin uh, in an usuli in a native uh, Muslim intellectual setting. It should begin from aqidah. What is our aqidah on this issue, on this matter, and then it should move to what is the fiqh, what have the fuqaha said in terms of practically dealing with this matter, what are their differences of opinion within the context of uh, the creedal and the legal discussion, fiqhi discussion. The ayat of the Quran will be brought, and the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be brought, and their different interpretations and their different linguistical meanings or possible linguistical meanings. Um, but because of the stark irrelevance that wahi, that revelation have taken in the lives of most people, they're not going to benefit from a discussion framed that way. The circles of the people of knowledge, people who bother to learn Arabic and Nahu and Sarf and Balagha and the subsidiary sciences of the Arabic language, that bother to read the books of the Fuqaha and the Mutakallimin. Um, that circle is a very small circle, so demographically it may not be all that relevant, even though essentially that is the primary discussion when you want to talk about what does Islam say about something. That circle is the circle that discusses the issue and that represents what Islam has to say about a thing. But because also there is a mandate to spread knowledge and to remind people to look toward wahi, toward revelation as a source of guidance, be they Muslim or otherwise. I'll choose to frame the discussion slightly differently so that it grabs people's interest in a way that they see as relevant first, and then interweave and interlock the legal and creedal discussion within that. And so, first, I wanted to discuss why is it that people get abortions in the first place? Why is it that people voluntarily terminate pregnancies in the first place? I think everybody who has any shred of fitrah in them would see the needless termination of a fetus or an embryo within the womb of a mother as a bad thing. Um, they vary in degrees, but just like a person, if you told them, hey, you have two kidneys, if I took one of your kidneys out and threw it away, um, most people will understand the kidney is there for a reason and you don't want to throw it out. There are some people that have completely like gone over the cliff rationally, and that's a different discussion that is relevant to this discussion. Um, but most people will think of this like the way they're born, unless they're like super indoctrinated into a particular ideology. They will see it as not a good thing, although they may vary in how they look at it. You know, because the pro-life camp will say it's murder from the moment of conception. It's murder, and then on the opposite extreme, there are people who claim that it really it really isn't anything at all. Both claims of which are not super helpful. And so, why is it that people voluntarily terminate a pregnancy? And the first reason, and the most important reason, and the reason that's sanctioned by the Sharia, is for health reasons. Um, the most extreme of which is when a pregnancy is going to claim the life of the mother. The Sharia has a principle that the life of the mother takes precedence over the life of the fetus because the life of the mother is a legally recognized life in its fullest sense, whereas the life of the fetus is the potential of a life, and as such, because of its connection to being the potential of full legal personage in our Sharia, it deserves sanctity and inviolability and respect. Um, However, if it's a choice of one over the other, every time the Sharia will give priority and precedence to the life of the mother. In the context of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, people will say, well, all of the states have this, have this written into their code, and even if they don't constitutionally, the right of the mother to protect her own life um, isn't something that can be legislated away or whatever. But I mentioned that the Sharia sanctions the voluntary termination of pregnancy, not only in the case where the mother's life is in severe danger or is in jeopardy, but for health reasons. There's a difference between the two of them. And so what happens is that, yes, there are pregnancies which will essentially kill the mother, but there are also pregnancies that might kill the mother. There are percentages that doctors ascribe to those pregnancies, and I bet you if you did the statistics, the percentages themselves are unreliable. What percentage will define what allows a mother to voluntarily terminate her pregnancy or not? Anyone who sat in a medical bioethics forum knows that these are very murky things, and they're very difficult to write law about. That's why medical bioethics is something that you can't just read a fiqh book about and be 100% above board, because life has all sorts of complicated issues. And so we talked about the mother's health. Okay, fine. In the case of death, that's one possibility. What if the pregnancy will cause such damage to the reproductive system of the mother that she will not be able to bear children again? Whereas if the pregnancy is terminated, it's possible she might have children and her reproductive system will be okay. What if the mother needs treatment for a different disease that may or may not kill her, and that treatment may or may not harm the fetus? All of these things become remarkably complicated. They become remarkably complicated. And for a person to say that there's like a legal code that you can write that will differentiate between one thing or another, they don't know how the human body works. And just to put this into perspective, because one of the things I see a lot online is people say, well, the number of women who get abortions for health purposes, they're like really small. They're like negligible. They're 2%, they're 1%, they're 0.2%, they're 0.02%. People throw these numbers out. I've called and asked gynecologists, and they say that there's not really a whole lot of data about all these things, and the data that's there doesn't have a whole lot of resolution. So this idea of like permanent damage to the health of a mother, or possible death of the health of the mother, possible death of the mother, etc. These, like why people terminate pregnancies for these things. There's not really a whole lot of data out there, and given that, naturally, something like between a third and a half of fertilizations will result in a miscarriage. That a large number of pregnancies that women are aware of will result in a miscarriage, and miscarriages themselves are not a simple and straightforward process. Oftentimes, they result in complications, just like pregnancies result in complications. Miscarriages result in complications as well. Just like pregnancies can be dangerous, miscarriages can be dangerous as well. And the same procedures that a person needs to use in order to clear the womb of a miscarriage are the same procedures that a person will use in an abortion and a voluntary termination. The only difference in the peril between the miscarriage and between the birth is that, unfortunately, قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ, Allah Ta'ala decided that baby was not going to live, or that fetus was not going to become a baby and it was not going to live. However, gynecologists and people who, medical professionals in this field will say oftentimes it's a very like game time call. Like you have to make a call right then and there, because the threat of infection progressing and sepsis and these types of things, women died from them, and they still die from these things to this day. And so women do get, they do voluntarily terminate their pregnancies because of health reasons. What's another reason women voluntarily terminate their pregnancies? It has to do with lifestyle. and it has to do in particular with the concept of zina, with the concept of illicit sexual relations, what the Sharia would classify as illicit sexual relations. And if terminating a pregnancy for health reasons is a recognized and sanctioned reason in the Sharia to terminate a pregnancy voluntarily, the issue of zina is a far bigger issue. That people want to be able to live how they live. They want to be able to, you know, splash the seed around, which is essentially what the expression of sifah in the Arabic means. They want to live that lifestyle like animals. And look, every human being is an animal, but that shouldn't be the preponderant condition on a person. Civilization is built on the idea of family, it's not built on the idea of sifah. And, people who live that lifestyle, they oftentimes have inconvenient children. Inconvenient children. That a man and a woman, they committed zina, and the woman became pregnant, and the man is not going to be there for her, is not going to help raise the child, etc. And so, it's abortion is looked as like a delete button, that's there as some sort of editing function for what's essentially a dysfunctional lifestyle. And the Sharia most certainly does not sanction this. Although there's a little bit more to say in the fiqhi discussion, but this is not a good thing. And then the third reason that people get abortions, as far as I can tell, is because of fear of resources, lack of resources. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He very clearly says in His book, He says, don't kill your children. لا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق. نحن نرزقكم وإياهم نحن نرزقكم وإياكم نرزقهم وإياكم. Allah Ta'ala in different places, two different places, He says, don't kill your children. Min imlaq. Don't kill your children because of poverty or because of the fear of poverty. We provide for you and for them. We provide for them and for you. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is the one who gives. Allah Ta'ala is the one who gives vision, and He forbade us from fearing provision when it comes to getting married. He forbade us from fearing for provision when it comes to having children and having a family. And this is one of the basic teachings of Islam. Again, it's very explicit from the text of the Quran. It's one of the basic teachings of Islam that my Shaykh, Ustadji Maulana Hassan, Allah Ta'ala give him a long life. Please don't attribute my shortcomings to him. He mentioned this. He said that what does it mean to believe in Allah Ta'ala being your provider? It means that even if the market price for grain, for a grain of wheat or a grain of rice, if the market price for grain should be that each grain costs an ashrafi or a dinar, a gold coin, $50, $60, $70, $200, $300, however much it costs, even if it gets to that price, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still will feed everybody bread. Everybody's daily bread, they'll all be fed. Why? Because that's Allah Ta'ala, that's His job as being the Razaq. وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there's no creature, not just human beings, there's no creature that crawls on the earth except for Allah Ta'ala Himself takes responsibility to provide for it. If a person is going to starve, it's because of Allah's decree that they starve, not because of lack of resources. And indeed, we actually see that in the world, right? We see that in the world, that people do starve despite us having superior amounts of technology, shipping, logistical support, etc. They still starve to death. It's because of greed and anger from people who just don't care, because the cruelty of people who just don't care. Otherwise, there's somebody who's hoarding something. Every person who's starving to death, there's a ton of wheat somewhere or another that's being hoarded or that's being burned in order to drive the commodity prices of food up. But this is an entire difference in worldview. The idea that there's limited resources and we're all going to end up getting into some sort of fist fight at one time or another. This is an idea that the people of Kufr always had, and this is why things like genocide make sense to them, because they say, well, we're all going to end up fighting over land and over food one day anyway, so we may as well plan to kill everybody else other than ourselves. And we may as well, when we get the chance, we may as well jump on that chance. And they do it. and it's not good. It's not a good thing, and it's not in line with the Quranic worldview. And that foul way of looking at the world has filtered down even to their own families and to their own children. Because imagine this: if one nation kills off every other nation in the world, what's going to end up happening is the factions within that nation are going to fight with each other then inevitably, and then within that factions, if those factions, one tribe or one faction will be ascendant, and the tribes within that faction will fight each other. That tribe gets ascendant, and then the clans will fight each other. That clan becomes ascendant. To what end? It's a shaitanic ploy. It doesn't really go very far. And so Allah Ta'ala says in His book, He says, لا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم. Don't be like those who forgot Allah, for He caused them to forget themselves. And this is one of the weird intellectual punishments of, turning your back on Allah Ta'ala, who is the Razak, the one who provides for everybody, emphatically provides for everybody, is that the fear of resources has gotten into people's heads to the point where, like a married husband and wife, in a suburban house with, a combined household income of like 6 figures and a car and an SUV, that they're so afraid about resources and money that they will also abort the potential for having a child as well, because of that same fear and because of that same thinking. And so these two reasons are definitely foul and evil reasons to delete a child, to delete a fetus from the womb. The idea of zina being a fundamental human right and a necessity for being happy, and aborting children because it's an inconvenient thing that comes along, piece of the baggage that comes along with that lifestyle of zina, and the idea of fearing for resources. These two are definitely illegitimate, but they do go hand in hand with this kind of world modernity. Um, this is a worldview which is part of the post-church enlightenment project in Western Europe, where people wanted to be free of rules. And when they say we want freedom, like when Muhammad and Fatima and Zayd and regular Muslims say we want freedom, what do we mean? We want to be able to go to the masjid. We want to be able to say Ameen out loud in the masjid, or say it quietly without someone slapping us in the back of the head. We want to be able to be, if I want to be a baker, then no one should force me to become a butcher, and etc. These are the things I want to be able to travel, to Makkah Mukarramah whenever I want. These are the types of things we think of when we think of as freedom. Freedom is a practical tool for a person to prosecute their slavehood toward Allah Ta'ala. But the modernist project doesn't want to even recognize that Allah Ta'ala exists, and it's antithetical to religion, and it's more usuli and principled manifestations, like in the militant secularism of places like France or Soviet Union, etc. And so what do people want from this freedom? They want from this freedom of any sort of societal norms, freedom from at the end of the day, the biological realities of gender, freedom from family, freedom from any sort of societal relationships. And it's interesting because they talk about freedom. The only way that freedom is going to be attained is by being a slave of the state. That ultimately the state is the only thing that has the ability to litigate what's right and wrong. It monopolizes violence in order to litigate that, and it will liberally, and I use the expression ironically, will use it liberally in order to suppress those that disagree with it. And so these two reasons that people voluntarily terminate their pregnancies, to regularize zina, and to somehow make some sort of cold and calculated plan with regards to resources. They're definitely part of the modernist project. They're completely foul reasons to terminate a pregnancy, and the ideologies that underpin them, even if they never, ever resulted in one abortion or termination ever, the ideologies are just satanic, and they're very dangerous. And sadly, we don't discuss these things because we don't discuss our own aqidah. Islam is really interesting because it is like this very unique worldview that encourages people to get knowledge and encourages people to understand things. Whereas, in the Israelite religion in ancient times, there was a priestly caste of people, and not everybody was a learned person, which there's aspiration to change that with rabbinic Judaism, which is probably not all that much older than Christianity, to be honest with you. In Christianity, in the Catholic Church, the Bible was translated into Latin, and it didn't make it past Latin until after the Enlightenment and after the Protestant Reformation. Otherwise, for the majority of the history of the church, lay people were not allowed to read the Bible. Even to this day, the Catholic Church has canon law, which is the codification of essentially Catholic fiqh, and lay Catholics are not allowed to read it. And it's not like you can go walk into the Catholic bookstore and buy the encyclopedic copy of canon law. It's considered none of the business of normal people. And so, this is a thing that in Islam people are encouraged to learn knowledge, to learn ilm. The issue with regards to creed, with regards to aqidah, is that if you don't know what your own creed is, then you will just automatically accept the creed that's fed to you. And with Islam, we have our aqidah, we believe in it, we want other people to believe in it as well. With exploitative systems of kufr, people have their creed that they reserve for themselves, which has to do with all of these types of things, and then they put out a fake creed for other people to believe in because that serves their purposes, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about the politics of all of these issues. And you just end up becoming somebody else's chump. And so these two reasons are definitely foul and bad reasons for um, for terminating pregnancy voluntarily.